It was supposed to be a quiet night. My parents were out for the weekend, leaving me home alone for the first time in years. I had always enjoyed the solitude. No siblings, no noise, just me and my own company. I had a stack of movies ready, snacks lined up, and the entire house to myself. By 11 p.m., I had settled into the couch, halfway through a horror movie, my attention glued to the screen. The sound of thunder outside added a nice touch to the atmosphere, making the shadows in the corners of the room seem a bit darker, the creaks of the old house a bit more noticeable. Then I heard it. A knock at the front door. It was subtle, barely loud enough to hear over the storm, but it was there. I paused the movie and listened, thinking maybe the wind had knocked something over. But after a moment of silence, the knock came again. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakable. I glanced at the clock. It was now midnight. Who could possibly be knocking at this hour? My heart started to race, but I shook it off. Maybe it was a neighbor or a late-night delivery gone wrong. I stood up, hesitating for a moment before heading toward the door. My hand hovered over the doorknob when something inside me screamed, "Don't open it." Instead, I looked through the peephole. Nothing. No one was there. A chill ran down my spine. I stood there staring through the peephole, waiting for something, anything, to move. But the porch was empty, the street beyond it eerily quiet. I even checked the security camera on my phone, but it showed the same thing. Nobody. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease, and returned to the living room. Maybe it was just my imagination, or the storm playing tricks on me. I resumed the movie, trying to forget about the knock. But 10 minutes later, it came again. This time, louder. My stomach tightened, and I froze. The knock was harder, more insistent, as if someone was demanding to be let in. My eyes flicked to the door, dread pooling in my gut. I didn't bother looking through the peephole this time. I just stood in the living room, staring at the door, my pulse racing. Then, the knocking turned into pounding, relentless, violent, like whoever was out there was desperate to break in. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer, just the constant brutal pounding. I backed away, retreating into the hallway as panic gripped me. My mind raced with possibilities. A prank, a robber, or worse. I dialed 911, my hands shaking, but before the call could connect, the pounding stopped. Silence filled the house, more suffocating than the noise had been. I stood there, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. The operator's voice came through my phone, but I hung up before I could speak. The quiet was more unnerving now. I walked back toward the door, cautiously checking the peephole again. Still nothing. My heart hammered in my chest as I slowly opened the door, just enough to peek outside. Rain poured down in sheets, drenching the front porch. But the space was empty. No signs of anyone having been there. No wet footprints. Nothing. I slammed the door shut, locking it tightly. I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom, my heart pounding in my ears. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it had to be the wind or a stray branch. But something felt wrong. Deeply, unsettlingly wrong. Then, just as I thought the night couldn't get any worse, I heard it again. But this time the knock wasn't at the front door. It was coming from inside the house. I was always a bit of a night owl. With my parents out of town for the weekend, I figured it would be the perfect time to stay up late, binge some shows, and enjoy the rare peace and quiet. Our house was a 2-story, and I liked the openness of it, even when it was dark. I felt safe there, like nothing could go wrong. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard the sound. I had been sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a faint creak from upstairs. It wasn't unusual for the house to make noises. It was old, and things creaked all the time. But this was different. It was slow, methodical, like someone was walking up there. I paused, listening intently. The creaks continued, moving from one end of the upstairs hallway to the other, as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth. My heart started to pound in my chest, but I told myself it was probably just the house settling. Old houses did that, right? The pacing stopped, and for a moment, everything was silent. I sighed in relief, turning my attention back to my phone. Then, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps coming down the stairs. They were slow, deliberate, as if someone was taking their time, savoring each step. I froze, my pulse quickening. There was no one else in the house. I was supposed to be alone. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until I could hear them clearly. Step, step, step. I grabbed a heavy book from the coffee table, clutching it in my hands like it could protect me. My eyes were glued to the staircase, waiting for whatever was making those footsteps to appear. But nothing did. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, just out of sight. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel something. An oppressive, suffocating presence that seemed to fill the entire room. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at the empty space where the footsteps had stopped. Then slowly, a shadow appeared on the wall. It was tall, impossibly tall, with long, spindly limbs that stretched unnaturally. The shadow moved, swaying slightly, like it was watching me. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin. The shadow stayed there for what felt like an eternity, unmoving, watching. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The footsteps resumed, heading back up the stairs, slowly fading into the silence of the house. I didn't sleep that night, and I never found out what or who had been in my house. But sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I still hear the footsteps on the stairs. I've always hated the feeling of being watched. It's that primal fear that makes your skin crawl, even when you're sure you're alone. I never thought it would happen in my own home, though, especially when I was supposed to be safe inside. It was a Friday night, and I had the house to myself. My parents were at a dinner party, and I figured I'd spend the night catching up on some work. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open, the glow of the screen the only light in the room. It was quiet, the kind of stillness that made you hyper-aware of every little sound. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, and my own breathing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A man standing outside the kitchen window. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. He was just standing there, his face partially obscured by the darkness, but I could see enough to know he was staring right at me. My first instinct was to grab my phone, but it was charging in the living room, just out of reach. I didn't dare move, afraid that any sudden movement would cause him to react. I hoped, prayed, that it was just a trick of the light, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But it wasn't. He was real. He stood there, motionless, for what felt like hours but was probably only a few seconds. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and knocked on the window. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. My body went cold. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The knock echoed in my ears, louder than it should have been, and the man didn't move. He just kept staring at me, his face a blank, emotionless mask. I finally gathered the courage to stand, my legs shaking as I backed away from the table. My eyes never left the window, but the man didn't follow my movement. He just stood there, watching, waiting. I ran to the living room, grabbing my phone and dialing 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type. The operator answered, but I couldn't speak. I was too terrified, my voice stuck in my throat, I glanced back toward the kitchen, expecting to see the man still standing there. But when I looked, he was gone. The police came a short while later, but they didn't find anything. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing to prove that anyone had been there. But I know what I saw. And now every time I walk by a window at night, I can't help but glance out of the corner of my eye, terrified that I'll see him again.